Hi, and welcome to Steel Talk. My name is Danny Stain, and in this show, I reach out to insiders in the steel fabricating industry and try and get a handle on how people are navigating this rapidly changing landscape under COVID-19. I think we're all struggling with this new reality and the stress that it's imposing on our businesses, on our family lives, and even on our emotional stability. In the upcoming shows, I'll be chatting to fabricators, not only here in the United States, but all around the world. And I'll also be chatting to manufacturers and service providers to understand how this is affecting the entire steel industry supply chain and to better understand what procedures they have implemented and where they see this is going. And in terms of upcoming shows, Tuesday of next week at 1 o'clock, I have a very special guest. We'll be talking to Michael Papanicolo from Union Steel, all the way from Cape Town, South Africa. And he's going to be giving us an amazing insight into what it's like to be in a country that's under total lockdown. And more than that, in a country that's had no alcohol sales for 4 weeks. So I'm sure that show is going to be a total eye-opener. So be sure to tune in and subscribe to our channel. Today, I have the privilege of speaking with a good friend and colleague, Tom Klash. Tom is an accountant here in South Florida, and he has agreed to come on our show to help us understand the various provisions allowed for us under the CARES Act, provisions that deal with corporations, employees, families, individuals, as well as the self-employed. But before we go any further, I do need to stress that Tom is here generously offering us his time, actually in the middle of his busiest time of the calendar, his tax season, and he's doing this to just help us better understand the situation. He's not here to advise you personally, so please make sure that before you make any decisions, you're speaking to your own accountant and getting advice from your own accountant. Anyway, with that out of the way, welcome to our show, Tom, and thank you for agreeing to be with us today.
Thank you very much, Danny. It's good to be here.
So, Tom, whereabouts are you sitting right now? Where is your business located?
The business is located in Hollywood, Florida, and we have been working here on a partial shutdown, not seeing clients face-to-face for the last 5 weeks, but we're managing to meet clients' demands. There are many people that need this financial information to secure their loans.
Well, thanks, Tom. I appreciate that. Tell us a little bit about what it is your company does for your customers. What is the service that you provide?
The services that we provide are in the area of financial accounting, which encompass audits, compilation financial statements, and of course taxes, income taxes, for individuals and for businesses.
Thanks, Tom. All right, so I know that initially when you and I first chatted, when I reached out to you, you were a little bit reluctant about coming on the show, purely because there was so much to read within the CARES Act to digest and even understand it, but so much of it was changing even on a daily basis that it feels like the goalposts are moving. Do I have that right?
The goalposts are moving, Danny, and if you can see the bags under my eyes from reading the SBA, the Federal Register last night, to become aware of another aspect of the law that is changing, or let's say clarified, for independent contractors, self-employed individuals.
Yeah. By the way, how many, just for interest sake, how many pages was this entire act?
I saw one that was 852 pages.
Well, if you got through that, you're a much better man than me. I know that I would have zoned out on page 2 or 3. But let's just take a sort of a helicopter view. My guess is that because of the sense of urgency of getting the act out to employers and employees and families, in order to have the intended effect to kind of stop the sort of cratering of the economy, that they've probably had to prepare this in haste. And I suspect that much of the language is, and even the intent, might be difficult to understand, or maybe even it might be interpreted in different ways. So I'm sure that there's going to be a lot of these kind of clarifications emerging in the upcoming weeks and months.
Yes, there will. And it's very, very important for your viewers to be aware of those changes by contacting and having discussions with their tax advisors, because some of these loans, like the Payroll Protection Program, carries with it a potential loan forgiveness. And if the application, pardon me, if the application for the loan exceeds what they are entitled to, it's not going to be forgiven. And many people, I fear, will end up with a loan as opposed to a forgiveness.
Yeah, very, very good point. We'll get, in my experience, when anybody gives you money or lends you money, there's always strings attached, and sometimes those strings are more like nooses. So we'll get to the strings and nooses a little bit later. Okay. But obviously, interpreting the provisions correctly is critical to qualifying correctly. Do I get that right?
That is absolutely correct, Danny.
All right. So let's just take a look at the CARES Act. Give me a helicopter view. Give me sort of a summary of what the provisions are for under the CARES Act.
The CARES Act contains many provisions. In my opinion, the most important and the most widely used provision is the Payroll Protection Program, which carries with it the potential of a loan forgiveness. There are other aspects of it: the employee retention credit, the emergency income disaster loan, the First Families CARE Act. There are many provisions, some of which will have tremendous financial impacts positively to taxpayers, particularly businesses and self-employed. For example, one such change that occurred is the ability of businesses who have lost money as a result of this fiasco, this disaster, to carry those losses back 5 years. In 2017, we had a tax act, and the tax act basically prohibited carryback of net operating losses, except for very select taxpayers, farmers and things, people of that nature. Now, with this, we can carry losses back to offset 100% of income in years prior. This is huge.
And if I'm not mistaken, there were different tax rates back 5 years ago. So that's going to be an interesting thing. Anyway.
Excellent point. Excellent point. Corporations were in a much higher tax bracket than 21% that they're currently paying. So by carrying the losses back, as opposed to foregoing a carryback and carrying it forward to offset future 21% brackets, it's a win for the employer.
Do you think there'll be any clarifications in terms of let's call it the tax rate that's applied, or do you think that the way we understand it right now, this will apply to the previous years?
I believe it will apply to the previous years, and I believe that whatever the loss is that was incurred in 2020, we'll be able to carry that back 5 years and recoup taxes that were paid at much higher tax brackets.
Yeah, so that really would be a fantastic relief for those people that incur losses during this financial year. What other provisions are there under the that you'd like to sort of touch on under the Total CARES Act? And we'll get to each one of these individually.
Sure. The Families First COVID Response Act affects employees and employers in a big way. And we'll talk about that later on, their employers are entitled to a dollar for dollar tax credit up to the amount of specified limits of monies paid to their employees for sick leave, taking care of children that can't attend school because the schools are closed, things of that nature.
Okay. We're going to get into the sort of the major components as it relates to corporations like our fabricators and our supply chain, and we'll get into what I would consider the four biggest components or provisions under the CARES Act that apply to us. But I think we read today that the SBA had just run out of money under the PPP Act. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. That was my understanding. And the SBA is now waiting for Congress to appropriate more funds. Because as you know, many people have not had a chance to apply. Many loan applications are sitting on bankers' desks, and a good number of taxpayers have not had an opportunity to enjoy the benefits of these loans.
Yeah, thank you. That's critical. I think the PPP came out. When was CARES Act passed? What was the date that it was actually passed?
I believe it was. No, the CARES Act, I believe, was effective March 12th or March 27th.
Okay, so a month. Gosh, it seems like time has stood still. Yeah, so I was listening to a podcast a few days ago, and this was with MetalCon, the metal roofing industry, and they actually did an online poll, and they asked the viewers how many people had actually filed for components under the CARES Act. And at that stage, only 35% had actually done anything. And of the people that had actually applied, and this is going back maybe 6 days ago, only 3% had actually heard anything back. However, I am beginning to hear from some of my fabricator colleagues that people are actually beginning to see funds, and hopefully if Congress moves quickly, we'll see some more float come into the system for this to extend a little bit wider. But certainly here in our company, we haven't heard anything, and we certainly haven't seen anything. So yeah, be really interesting. So Tom, if you don't mind, I think let's break this up into the four major provisions, and that would be the Payroll Protection Program, the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, the Employee Retention Credit, and then finally the sort of the Emergency Income Disaster Loan. If you're okay, if that makes sense. All right, so let's start off with the PPP. Who does it apply to, and how does it work?
The Payroll Protection Act applies to small and mid-sized businesses, generally defined as businesses that have less than 500 employees, and it's available. Well, originally it was available through June 30th, but I'm sure it will be extended.
Correct. Okay.
The maximum loan amount is $10 million per employer, or it's really based upon a formula of payroll costs.
How is this formula of payroll costs defined? Because I've read it in different ways.
That's a good question. And the payroll costs are really defined as gross payroll. We're talking about corporations. We're talking about entities that have employees. Pardon me.
Yep.
So it's basically 2.5 months of covered costs. Those covered costs that are used in the formula: A, annual gross payroll; B, healthcare costs for employees;
yep.
C, employer retirement contributions. These are contributions to 401k plans, defined benefit plans that the employer has made on behalf of the employees, plus state and local, not federal, state and local taxes, such as unemployment taxes.
Sure.
Add that up, divided by 12, which is to translate it to a monthly basis, and times 2.5. So it's basically 2.5 months worth of payroll.
But this, let me understand, this does specifically exclude 1099. So any contractors that you have what you would consider as part of your payroll, they are excluded from this calculation. Is that correct?
That's correct, because the independent contractors on the payroll can apply for their own PPP because they're self-employed individuals. So these are only people that for which Social Security taxes, commonly known as FICA taxes,
sure,
that relate to that. So once you've got that, then that money has to be spent on certain things. You don't have the ability to spend it on whatever you want, like plant expansion or anything like this.
Well, let's come down to those terms just right now, a little bit later,
sure,
because there are quite a few things that are absolutely specific about how that money is spent, and I see some people being tempted with some ideas of what they can or cannot do with these funds. That I want to deal with those in quite some detail. But let's talk about the loan forgiveness side of this. What is your understanding of the loan forgiveness?
The loan is forgiven to the extent that at least 75% of the loan monies are applied to payroll costs, which we just talked about. What are payroll costs?
Okay.
The other 25% may be spent on specifically items such as rent, utilities, business mortgage interest, and that's pretty much it for the other. If you spend the money on something else, you're not going to have that loan forgiven. You're going to have a loan, and you're going to have to pay for it down the road.
So let's talk about these things that you cannot spend the money on.
Okay. Things that you cannot spend the money on would be dividends, plant expansion, paying other.
Well, I'm going to put you on the spot here, because as you know, the nature of our business here, if that 25% was floating around and it was significant enough to buy a piece of equipment, would that be a loan forgiven, or does that fall under the plant expansion sort of category?
That would fall under the same category, yes.
Yeah, and that's the unfortunate thing. And I wish that term didn't exist, because I've seen people saying, well, I'm going to take advantage of the PPP. I'm going to borrow this money, and part of what I'm going to do is I'm going to buy this equipment and do all of these things. But I think your and my understanding is fair. We're on the same page on this. That this would be definitely precluded. You can certainly get the money, but in terms of forgiveness, there is going to be no forgiveness for that expense.
That's correct. That's correct.
All right. So what are the other terms of this PPP in terms of collateral and loan fees and all of those kind of things?
If the loan, if the loan amount is $25,000, there's usually, well, with the PPP, there's no collateral or personal guarantee required. Okay. The emergency income disaster loan, that has specific requirements with respect to guarantees, collateral, and that sort of thing.
Okay, and we'll get to that separately, yes. And I think there are some sort of tiers under which the different amounts have to be guaranteed. Yeah, but no collateral for the PPP. Is that correct?
Correct.
And no loan fees either to the borrower, to us as a company take it there. Nothing. Okay.
Right. The loan fees are covered by SBA.
Okay.
The one thing that taxpayers need to keep in mind is that once you get these loan proceeds, you can't just spend them 75% on your own payroll. You have to maintain the same headcount of employees that you had previously. And the payroll, again, the payroll costs have to be, applied 75%, at least to the loan proceeds have to be applied 75% to the payroll.
Well,
but
let me interrupt you here, because I've struggled a little bit with this, trying to understand this. So the way I hear you, it says that if you do apply for the money using the formula of 2.5 times your average wage, and you get this funds, you need to maintain your existing headcount. You cannot retrench or repurpose or furlough people and still take this money, or am I missing something?
The headcount would be counted even if you furloughed them, but if you paid them, continued to pay them, they're still on your roll, your employee roll.
Okay. All right, sorry, you were about to say something else when I interrupted you, so let you continue there, Tom.
It's a very good idea. Once the corporation or the business receives the proceeds from the application of the PPP, a very good idea to put that money in a separate bank account so that there will be no question as to what the money was spent on, how it was spent. It'll be very transparent.
It sounds like you see that there might be some clawback in the future where people are doing some forensic accounting in years to come to see what people did with the funds. Is that kind of your expectation when it comes to that, let's call it the tax year?
You can count on it. You can really count on it. So I think many borrowers will be face-to-face with bank examiners or SBA examiners, auditors, to examine what the monies were spent for. The government is not just going to spend this money and not hold people accountable for the spending of it, for the application of it.
Right. And obviously, this money doesn't go into your bank account as income. It goes there as a liability. How when you pump this into your account, how do you pump it in?
That's a very good question, Danny, and it's a question that I have asked many of my colleagues and posted on a professional blog, and I got different answers. To the way I see it, the money that you receive is a loan until it is forgiven. And when it is forgiven, it is not taxable. That's in the law. My question is, what about the spending of that money? How is that treated on your books? You're getting free money. Now, you're going to write it off? You're writing off the payroll and the rent and all of this that you received with free money. Isn't that kind of using the government's money for creating an artificial net operating loss? I don't know the answer. I've had people tell me both ways.
Yeah, I think what we're going to see is a lot of clarifications will have to come out of these, because, as I say, this thing was rushed to market. The speed, sense of urgency was critical, getting it out there, trying to stem the fear. It was such an important part of making this happen quickly. And I think there's a lot of unintended consequences when you don't have the time on your hands to sort of think of everything in the way it plays out. So yeah, I totally buy into the concept of keeping this in a separate bank. When somebody gives me anything, I know there's a string attached, and I want to make sure that I can account for everything that I've got and everything I might have to pay back. And I'm certainly not going to consider it as a forgiven loan until it's forgiven. The way I want to treat it is a liability. I have to, because there's always a chance that somebody will claw it back. Anyway, I don't mean to be too pedantic about it, but that's how I would treat it within my own business. Yeah.
I think that's the way to do it.
All right, so let's move on to the second part, which a second largest part, and I'd consider that the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. Tell me, what is this provision for, and who does it seek to compensate, and how do people go about getting aid?
This provision requires covered employees to provide covered employers.
So employers, yeah, right.
Employers, yes. Right. Sorry. To provide employees with paid sick leave or expanded family and medical leave through the end of December 31 of this year.
As it pertains to COVID. I just want to make sure. So this is a very specific thing that relates to somebody that's infected or has to take care of their family that are affected by COVID. Is that correct?
This is correct. And a covered employer is generally an employer that has less than 500 employees. If an employer has less than 50 employees, they can opt out if they can show that the payment of this money is going to adversely impact their financial viability, the ability to remain as a going concern.
Yeah, I think if we take the helicopter look, I think the entire purpose of the entire CARES Act was to try and make sure that a lot of businesses that were immediately teetering on the verge of collapse had all of these different sources of income and provision, and that we didn't suddenly just go and let everybody go and there'd be this sort of more than this unemployment rate than we've seen. I think that the whole idea was to provide companies with the ability to fund their staff and to cover their staff and to also allow for their staff to provide for their own family. Is that kind of the idea?
Correct. Yeah, this is correct. And so you ask, who does this benefit? It benefits both parties. It benefits the employees because they're receiving compensation to pay for their living expenses. It benefits the employers because there are a series of tax credits that are available to the employer that the employer can deduct off of their payroll taxes going forward. So
how in terms of the, let's call it, sitting there with your IRS agent or your SBA loan manager after all of these funds have gone through, are they looking for doctor's notes? Are they looking for funeral expenses? Or how will they be assigning this to a COVID related item or a non-COVID related item?
That's a good question. And I really don't see how much of this can be examined. I mean, we're talking about millions of people here that are receiving the benefit from this.
Yeah, I don't think it's possible. I don't know what our total number of employees are in the United States, but we certainly don't have the apparatus or the personnel or any kind of way to do this on a forensic level unless there's tips coming from insiders saying that people are spending this money on the wrong stuff. I'm sure there'll be a whole bunch of fake COVID death certificates and a whole bunch of fake doctor's notes related to COVID. I'm sure there'll be a whole bunch of crematoriums issuing sort of fake stuff. I just know when you start to flush money onto people, the scammers come out immediately. And you can already see it happening. People are trying to take money away from people, and people are already forming little companies on the sides trying to figure out how do they get a piece of, let's call it this play money that's been thrown around. And I don't mean to say play money, I mean just this additional money that's come into circulation.
Yes. Conversely, I have talked to people that have told me they're not going to apply for this because they're really not that adversely affected. Even though their businesses are suffering, they can weather the storm.
So if you take a look at, let's say that my company does take advantage of this and I have employees that have to go home. They're either ill or they have to care for an ill member within their family. How are those? What are the rates of pay for that sick leave period? Do you have some sort of idea of how those are treated?
Yes, yes. Um, an employer would pay, and this is part of the requirement, an employer would pay 2/3 of the regular rate of pay to an employee due to the inability of to work as a result of having to care for a child uh, whose school has been closed. So 2/3 of the regular rate. Now that is um,
Well,
there are
let me
limits.
just stop you there, because I mean, we don't see any end in sight right now, and we're hearing. I'm, hearing of some universities, and I know this. We're not talking about university age kids, but we're hearing about some schools not even looking at doing admissions for 2021. Thinking about doing, let's call it in classroom schooling only for the 2000 and July 2021. So staying in an online environment. But let's just imagine I have an employee who has to go home to take care of his kid, who's now at home through 2000 through June 2021. How does this continue indefinitely?
Right now, employers are uh, required to provide a 10-week additional leave of absence after the initial 2-week.
I
So
see.
right now,
Okay.
the maximum is 12 weeks. But
I see.
you're right. That may not handle the situation to the end of the year. We're a long way off from that. And many people I've spoken to have indicated that this could actually extend into the fall. And here we are in April.
Yeah, so that's it's going to be interesting, and certainly hope this little blip on the horizon with the SBA running out of money today is not indicative of what's coming down the line for all of us with all of these different components of the CARES Act. Um, all right, so we've done PPP, we've done the Family First. Let's take a look at the Employee Retention Credit. Give me some idea of what that is all about and how it works.
Sure. The employee retention credit is a credit against payroll taxes equal to 50% of qualified wages paid to employees each quarter, up to $10,000 per employee through the end of this year. So that is really basically to pay someone to stay home. If due to a quarantine situation or to care for a child. Um, so this is
Does
a
does
credit.
does this sort of overlap with the Family First? It almost
Yes,
sounds like there is a little bit of an overlap there.
yes, it does. It does overlap, uh, except that the employee retention credit is subject to a different percentage versus the dollar for dollar limitation for paying employees to uh, take care of their children, uh, be housebound because they are uh, suffering from the effects of coronavirus. Uh, so both of these, employee retention credit and the Families First, are tax credits that employers can take on their payroll tax returns.
Interesting. Okay. Um, and what are the qualifications for the actual company? For a company like myself, are there any specific qualifications in order to qualify for this?
500 employees or less. Um, qualified qualified wages. If you have less than 100 employees, it's wages paid to all employees. If you have more than 100 employees, it's wages paid to employees that are not providing services. In other words, sick or caring for the sick.
So
So
let's talk about businesses that have to be suspended. For instance, a restaurant or a nightclub or all of these people. Obviously these have to be a huge component of the recipients under this component.
yes, so you're talking about restaurants, they could possibly have more than 500 employees. And I believe there's some type of a exception for people of that, for employers of that size. It would be unfair to hotels, the same thing.
All right. How are the qualified wages defined under this component of the Act?
The qualified wages are wages that are paid to an employee for caring for a sick person. Qualified wages could be also paying a person to stay home because they're recovering from this virus.
Okay.
They're quarantined. Um, so
Yeah, I'm sure there's a whole bunch of definitions in there that within this Act that we've got to understand
yes.
and totally understand. All right, well let's leave that alone and let's move on to, let's call it the fourth component of this. And I know we're skipping over a lot of stuff and we're going really rapidly through this, but we have limited time and we're not trying to provide very specific or any advice at all. We're just trying to give an overview for people that are looking in from the outside and trying to figure out. So let's talk right now about the fourth component here, and this would be the emergency income disaster loan. What exactly is this? How much are they worth? How do you apply for them? Who does it apply to? Give me some insight into this, Tom.
Okay, the emergency income disaster loan is available. These are loans up to $2 million per employer. It's available to small businesses, i.e. businesses that have less than 500 employees, independent contractors, and self-employed individuals through the end of this year. This loan, you apply for this loan directly to the SBA. There's no collateral required if the loan is up to $25,000. If you're applying for a loan that is $25,000 or more, let's say up $25,000 up to $199,000, they're asking, SBA will want collateral. And if the loan request is $200,000 or more, they'll want a personal guarantee and collateral.
Okay. And what sort of interest? What interest rate is this loan at, or is it forgiven?
Yes, this is a 3.75% interest rate, and the term extends to up to 30 years as determined by the SBA.
And that interest rate is fixed, I'm guessing. There's no chance of that varying with prime as it moves over a 30-year period. It's locked in at 3.75.
Yeah, right now it's locked into 3.75, but when you're dealing with the U.S. government, things are subject to change.
Okay. I get that, right. And then no origination fees, I'd guess. And how long does it take if you need a loan like this, how long before you would be qualified or start receiving funds?
The target was 2 to 3 weeks, but I don't know how long it's taking. I have no clients that really have applied for this yet. In terms of how to apply, I would suggest applying for the PPP loan first. When that money runs out after the 2.5 months, then consider this emergency income disaster loan.
Right. Okay. And then I still think that there are some restrictions on what you can do with this emergency income disaster loan. I think this also precludes you from spending it on expansion of your facilities or equipment or those kind of things, or have I got that wrong?
No, you're right. It's less restrictive though than the Payroll Protection Act, because there's no stipulation that you have to spend so much, 75% on payroll and so much. It's basically for general operating expenses.
Okay. But can you use this to buy equipment, or can you use this to expand your company?
No, it's not. It's not meant for expansion. It's meant for survival.
Okay. Yeah, and I think this is a cautionary tale, because I've heard of, we're in the business of selling product, and obviously with capital goods, people need confidence. But if they have, let's call it cheap money or free money, there's some confidence that comes from that. It might be an opportune moment, but I do believe that there are some restrictions, some very significant restrictions on what you can do with this funding. And like you said, I think the intention is for the survival of business and for keeping people employed. And I think that's the intent. This is not, none of the CARES Act is designed for somebody to gain market share or to, get rid of his competitor. The idea is for all of us to survive through this together. I think essentially it would be a fantastic environment if we all emerged on the other side in the same condition that we entered into it on this side. If you somehow found a loophole to use this, let's call it our money, the government's money, which is the citizens' money of the United States, if you took that and used it to fund something for yourself that gave you an edge in the market, I think that would be an inappropriate use of the funds.
Yes, it would. No question.
Yeah. Anyway, so there's going to be a lot of ethical and morality debates going on as to what people are doing with this. But Tom, I know we have limited time, and there's so much to this CARES Act that we haven't even begun to touch on, and I really appreciate you giving us this oversight. I don't know how you or anybody else, but especially somebody like yourself who's in the middle of tax season, I have no idea how you've managed to sort of distill this and actually impart it to somebody as dumb as myself. So I really, really just want to say thank you so much for this time. But I want to stress to our viewers, again, that Tom is not giving advice. He's just giving us an overview. So I know we have to make these kind of disclaimers because there's always people waiting in the wings to say, you told me to do this and I did this and it didn't work out the way I thought. As Thomas so importantly said here, we're just kind of giving an overview. I mentioned earlier on that there are always, when people give you something and you think it's for free, or they loan you something and you think that it might be for free, or it might be a really long time before you have to pay it back. Generally, there are always strings, and sometimes those strings are nooses. So, Tom, I'm curious about you. You and I, over the years, have touched base on a lot of things. I've reached out to you because I've always respected your advice, your counsel, but also because you touch so many different industries. You prepare people's taxes, companies' taxes in so many different areas of the economy. You have such a good insight into what's happening. So my question to you is, we're right now at the point of not necessarily printing, but we're creating $6.5 trillion of money that we're flushing into the economy. In terms of strings and nooses, what is the long-term impact if we're flying in a helicopter and looking over the US economy? Let's just keep it at the US right now, in your opinion. And I know you don't know the answer, but what's your opinion on this?
I think it's going to stimulate the economy. I think the big question is, how long will it take before we can get back to operating the economy as it was before this pandemic? There's no question that this money will stimulate the economy. That's the whole purpose of it. But the question is when.
I don't doubt that for a second, and I think it's doing absolutely that. So let me ask you another question then. How long do you think it is before the United States emerges out of this pandemic and reaches an economic level similar to 2019? What do you think that time frame is?
Let me get my crystal ball.
Come on, Tom.
I fully expect that this is going to last through the fall of
The actual
this year.
pandemic itself, the actual, yeah,
Yes,
the current thing, right? Yeah.
Yes.
And you don't, I mean, right now, my understanding is that with this $6.5 or $6 trillion of deficit, of stimulus, we now have a national deficit that now exceeds our GDP, which is the first time since World War II that we've been in this situation. So we're in really historic environments. I'm just not sure that the market has priced this in. I'm not sure that people are staring at this. And of course, whenever you flush money into a system, there generally, not always, but there generally is some inflationary aspect moving forward. Do you foresee anything like that?
I really do. It's a tough question, Danny. It's frightening. It's frightening for business and for what I see in the future. In spite of all this money that's going into the economy, I don't know what the outcome is going to be, honestly.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I'm just, and I know I'm putting you on the spot and I'm taking you outside of your area of expertise, but it's because you deal with so many different people in so many different walks of life. So I'm curious about the feedback that you're getting. Are the people that you're chatting to looking at this in a sort of 3 months, 6 months, year, 2 year, 3 year frame? What is the feedback that you're getting?
People that I've spoken to that were first affected by this are in the medical profession, dental physicians, and they're, I think, overly optimistic and somewhat desperate because their businesses have had to shut down. And they're looking at a 3 to 4 month recovery. But I think that, as I said, I think that's overly optimistic. So how long can, at 2.5 months worth of payroll, what's going to happen after that? And many people, many businesses are operating on a shoestring as it is, being overfinanced with previous expansion, and they have debt service on that. Now they're going to incur additional debt service.
Yeah, the funny thing that you mentioned that when we first heard of COVID and we started to get an idea of the rate of infection and everything, one of the first calls I made was to a friend of mine. We race cars together. He has a bank based in Alabama, and he's got his finger firmly on the pulse. And the first thing I said to him was, do you see a liquidity issue in the markets? And this is going back about 4 or 5 weeks ago. And he said, no, I don't believe that there is. But I think we're starting to see the banks, and we look at the bank stocks, and I know it's different to the 2008 recession where the issue was systemic within the banking system. This is not the case now, and we've seen how quickly the banks have rushed to help us. But I was very concerned about liquidity back then, and I still am today, and I start to see the pricing into the market that reflects a concern for this, and the fact that the SBA has already run out of funds within a few weeks of implementing this act. I foresee a liquidity issue that means a longer term repercussions for us. And I sincerely hope I'm wrong, but I tend to always have a fairly long term, sight. I have been blessed with some kind of helicopter vision. I don't always get it right, but I have got it right in the past. I think the big difference for us right now, if you sort of just go back to World War II, the only time the entire world's economy went into a shutdown was in World War II. In every other occasion, we've had regional issues. Something was happening in the States. We had 9/11, but the rest of the world was going on. We had the recession in the States in 2008. The rest of the world was carrying on. But here we have the entire world shutting down as one. The difference is that at the end of World War II, there was a declaration that the war was over, and 100% of the world's population rushed outside into bright sunlight, and they started working immediately to start rebuilding.
Yes.
I just don't see us getting the signal to say right now, unless we have a vaccine or something, that, hey, by the way, the threat is over, let's rush off and we can start doing this together. And so my concern is that there is a fairly long-term aspect to this before we rush back in and get all confident again. Or am I missing something?
No, I think you're right on. I think that's very accurate.
Well, like I say, Tom, I sincerely hope that I am wrong. Listen, yeah, I look here, and by the way, I don't know who sent out the memo. We're both wearing blue shirts today. I don't know how that happened. But Tom, you've always been one of these fit guys. I've known you from the beach, from sailing, and if I remember correctly, you were a master's level swimmer. You would go to the Swimming Hall of Fame in Fort Lauderdale, and if I'm not mistaken, you would swim a kilometer or something like that. How many lengths were you doing back then?
About 60 lengths in a 50-meter pool.
Okay. So I'm guessing the Swimming Hall of Fame is closed right now. It's a public pool. I'm guessing it's shut down.
Oh, it's shut down. It was actually closed in April of 2019 for renovation, and who knows when it will open up. Yeah. I found another pool, but that's closed also.
So how many laps of your pool do you have to do to get the same kind of distance?
Well, unfortunately, I have a 10-meter pool in my backyard, so it's even with I would have to spend a lot of time in it.
More time turning than stroking. So, in your life right now, what are you doing to stay fit, to stay healthy, maintain a routine? I know that you're working flat out. In fact, my understanding is that you're at office 7 days a week, which is not healthy. But how are you? I mean, you've got to be doing something to keep your mind focused and positive. What are you doing in your time?
Well, I practice a little bit of yoga in the morning, do some calisthenics, work out on a Nordic track, so I don't lose my touch for cross-country skiing, and I swim my 50 laps in my backyard pool.
Oh, well, I'm glad to hear that. Tom, thank you so much for joining us today. I know we took a lot of time out of your day. My regards to Cynthia. I wish you and her and everybody in your family, to your daughters, to everybody, please stay safe, do the clever things, be careful. This thing is still around us, and we wish you best of health. And I cannot wait to share a beer with you on the beach in the near future, Tom. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for inviting me, and good health to you and your viewers.
Thanks, Tom. And to our viewers, thank you so much for all of you that have emailed us with your feedback and suggestions. Very much appreciated. We're trying to implement as much of the suggestions that you've done. As you know by now, we're broadcasting live twice a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And don't forget to join us next week on Tuesday when we speak with Michael Papanicolo from Cape Town, South Africa. The country's on a total lockdown, and there is zero alcohol. I'm not sure I'm not sure that I'd want to come out on the other side of that. But anyway, thanks to all of you who've been viewing. If you found our show entertaining or insightful, please give us a big thumbs up and hit that subscribe button down below. And we look forward to catching up with all of you again next week. Till then, goodbye, stay safe, and be healthy. I really appreciate it. Thanks, everybody. Goodbye.